Betty Vasquez sat in the back row of Combat Theory 301, watching her classmates fiddle with their ceremonial weapons like children trying on costumes. The Zolani cadet beside her kept tweaking the settings on his energy blades, sending off tiny sparks that made him grin. A Vex across the aisle polished her plasma rifle for the third time in an hour. None of them had ever fired a weapon outside a simulation. "Attention, cadets." Commander Theakmore's voice sliced through the chatter like a vibroblade. The Zolani instructor stood at the front of the amphitheater, scaled hands clasped behind his back, yellow eyes sweeping the room with precise calculation. "Today we discuss trust." Betty shifted in her seat. In a military academy, trust usually meant someone was about to make a mistake. "Combat effectiveness depends not on individual skill," Theakmore said, pacing slowly, claws clicking against the polished floor, "but on unit cohesion. How do we build trust among species who have never fought side by side?" Cadet X3 raised a tentacle. "Shared training exercises, sir." "Correct. But insufficient." The commander stopped and faced them. "True trust requires vulnerability. You must reveal your weaknesses to those who are expected to protect them." A cold knot formed in Betty's stomach. She had heard this speech before, different words, different worlds. It always ended the same way. Which brings us to today's exercise. Theakmore's lip plates curved faintly. "Remove your armor. All of it. Place your weapons on the floor." The room erupted in uneasy murmurs. Hegman students exchanged nervous looks through their visors. A Corvani cadet laughed, assuming it was a joke. "Sir." Cadet Yorner's voice trembled. "Remove everything?" "Everything," Theakmore replied evenly. "How can you trust someone to guard your back if you refuse to show it?" One by one, they obeyed. Energy weapons clattered to the floor. Armor plates were stacked neatly beside chairs. The sharp clicks of clasps and buckles filled the amphitheater as 63 cadets from 12 species prepared to expose themselves to one another. Betty didn't move. "Cadet Vasquez." The commander's eyes locked on her. "Is there a problem?" "No, sir." Her voice was steady. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. Around her, alien cadets stood in bare skin, chitin, or scales. The Vex looked fragile without their armor supplements. The Zolani seemed strangely diminished without their ceremonial plates. "Then comply with the exercise." Betty stared at the floor. "Sir, I would rather not." Silence crashed over the room. "Rather not." Theakmore's voice dropped to a low, dangerous whisper. "This is not a request. It is a direct order." "I understand, sir." "Then you understand the consequences." She lifted her head and met his gaze. "Yes, sir." For a long moment, the only sound was the steady hum of the Academy's ventilation system. 62 alien cadets watched the standoff, unable to understand why a human would risk expulsion over something so simple. Theakmore stepped closer. "You are preventing your classmates from completing the exercise." "Then maybe," Betty said quietly, "the exercise should be voluntary." "Nothing in military service is voluntary." His claws extended slightly. "Remove it. Now." Betty closed her eyes, took a slow breath, and began unfastening her armor. The chest plate came off first, revealing a standard-issue combat shirt. Then the arm guards, the leg protection, the reinforced boots. Each piece was placed carefully on the floor, aligned with practiced precision. When her fingers reached the hem of her shirt, they trembled. "Just the shirt, cadet," Theakmore said more softly. "We are not barbarians." Betty pulled the fabric over her head. The silence that followed was different. Not curiosity. Not discomfort. Recognition. Her torso told a story no classroom simulation ever could. Burn scars covered her left shoulder and trailed down her arm in twisted patterns of extreme heat. The damage was old, but unmistakable: plasma fire, close-range detonation, survival by inches. But it was her back that drew a sharp gasp from Cadet Yorner. Parallel lines of scar tissue ran from her shoulder blades to her lower spine. Too deliberate to be accidental. Too extensive for training. "Cadet Vasquez." Theakmore's voice had lost its edge. "Where did you receive those injuries?" Betty turned slowly to face the room, calm under the weight of 62 stares. Colony Blackwater 5, sir. 3 years ago. During the Zalani invasion. The color drained from the commander's scales. That was classified as a minor territorial dispute, he said carefully. Minimal casualties. Tell that to the 800 colonists who never reached the evacuation ships. Cadet X3's optical sensors flickered as if struggling to focus. The report stated it was resolved peacefully. A diplomatic success. Betty let out a short, humorless laugh. Diplomatic success. She touched the scar on her shoulder. This is from carrying a wounded child through plasma bombardment. Her hand moved to her back. These are from crawling through burning wreckage to reach survivors. Her voice hardened. While your diplomatic success turned my home into glass. The amphitheater felt smaller somehow, as if the air itself had thickened. Cadets from species involved in the invasion stared at her scars with expressions that might have been shock or guilt. Thicmore opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time since Betty had known him, the decorated officer looked uncertain. The official reports are incomplete, Betty finished. But I suppose that's not covered in command doctrine. She reached for her shirt, suddenly eager to hide the evidence of her past. Before she could pull it on, Cadet Yorner stood. Wait. The Vex's voice was barely audible. If the reports were wrong about Blackwater 5, what else were they wrong about? Betty paused, the fabric hanging in her hands. Around the room, certainty began to fracture. Textbook history, polished and comfortable, was cracking under the weight of something real. But that wasn't the shocking part. The real shock came after Cadet Yorner asked her question. Every alien in the room turned toward Commander Thicmore, as if he personally held the truth to every lie they had ever been told. The bronze of his scales had faded to a sickly yellow-green, and his claws were fully extended, something Betty recognized as a clear sign of stress. Cadet Yorner, return to your seat, he ordered, but the authority in his voice had thinned. No. The Vex remained standing, her compound eyes reflecting the harsh classroom lights like fractured mirrors. I want to know what really happened at Blackwater 5. That incident is classified above your clearance level, Thicmore replied. But he was edging away from Betty, as if her scars might spread. Betty pulled her shirt back on and rose to her feet. Classified, she repeated. Right. Wouldn't want the galaxy finding out that your minor territorial dispute lasted 3 days and killed nearly 1,000 civilians. That's enough, Cadet Vasquez. Is it? Her voice grew stronger, echoing across the silent amphitheater. I've been quiet for 3 years. I signed your non-disclosure agreements. I stayed silent during the peace talks where your government promised reparations that never came. I even enrolled in this academy because I thought maybe, just maybe, working within the system might stop another Blackwater 5. She gestured toward her classmates, many still half undressed, staring at her with confusion and dawning horror. But looking at your faces now, I'm starting to think the system is the problem. Cadet X3's optical sensors flickered. Hegemony databases show no record of civilian casualties during the Blackwater 5 incident. Of course they don't. Betty let out a sharp laugh. You can't have alliance members believing their precious coalition burns children for territory. Children. Yorner's voice cracked. 43, Betty answered calmly. Ages 6 months to 16 years. Would you like their names? I remember every single one. The room was so still she could hear the ventilation system cycling overhead. Moments ago, these cadets had been joking and polishing weapons. Now they stared at her as if the ground beneath their education had cracked open. Commander Thicmore straightened his uniform, trying to regain control. Cadet Vasquez, you are out of line. Return to your seat immediately. Am I? I thought this was a trust exercise. She spread her arms slightly, scars still visible above the collar of her shirt. You wanted vulnerability. You wanted us to expose our weaknesses. Here's mine. I trusted your government to tell the truth about what happened to my home. She turned away from him and addressed the class directly. 3 years ago, I was a civilian transport pilot on Blackwater 5. It was a farming colony, mostly human families who wanted distance from the crowded core worlds. We grew food. We raised kids. We stayed out of politics. Her voice settled into the steady rhythm of someone who had told this story in closed rooms, to officials who promised confidentiality and offered nothing else. The Zalani battle fleet arrived on a Tuesday morning. No warning. No communication. They began bombing civilian targets immediately. That's not, Thicmore started. Not what? Betty snapped, turning on him. Not how you remember it. Were you there, Commander? Did you watch a fusion bomb turn an elementary school into a crater? Did you smell burning flesh when the community center took a direct hit? His mouth opened. No words came out. That's what I thought. She faced the class again. The orbital bombardment lasted 18 hours. When it stopped, we thought it was over. We organized rescue teams, set up triage stations, searched for survivors. Yorner had sat down, but she leaned forward, listening as if her entire worldview depended on every word. That's when the ground forces landed. Not to provide aid. To finish the job. Betty's hand drifted to her shoulder, tracing the burned scar beneath the fabric. I was evacuating wounded civilians. My transport could carry 26 people if we packed tight. We made 4 runs before they shot us down. 4 runs. X3 asked, their voice filtered through a translator that tried, and failed, to hide something like disbelief. 4 runs. 68 people saved. Betty's tone was flat, almost clinical. On the 5th run, they were waiting. A plasma cannon hit the port engine as we lifted off, with a load of children on board. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, a Corvani cadet spoke. How did you survive? Luck. Stupidity. Maybe both. She gave a small shrug. The crash was hard, but the emergency systems kept the passenger compartment intact. Most of the kids were alive. Scared. Hurt. But alive. Her eyes locked onto Thicmore. We were stranded in hostile territory. Your ground troops were sweeping the area. The rules of engagement clearly state, he began weakly. The rules of engagement are words on paper, Betty said coldly. I watched your soldiers execute wounded civilians who couldn't keep up during forced marches. The commander's scales had faded to gray. I hid in a collapsed building for 2 days with 11 children, she continued. We listened to your troops pacify the population. When the Galactic Fleet arrived to mediate the dispute, we were the only survivors within a 6-kilometer radius. Cadet Yorner raised a trembling hand. The official report said the human colonists were relocated to safer worlds. The ones who agreed never to speak about what happened. Betty's smile held no warmth. People become very cooperative when you threaten to classify them as enemy combatants unless they sign the correct documents. You signed, X3 observed quietly. You accepted the non-disclosure terms. Betty met their gaze. Yes, she said. I was 18, Betty said quietly. Alone. Traumatized. They told me the NDA was temporary, just until the incident could move through proper diplomatic channels. She let out a dry laugh. That was 3 years ago. I'm still waiting for those channels to move. Commander Thicmore stepped forward, his hand drifting toward his communicator. Cadet Vasquez, I am ordering you to cease this disruption immediately. You are violating your security agreements. And what? Betty straightened. You'll expel me? Court-martial me? Add my name to another classified casualty list. She looked around at her classmates. Confusion had shifted into something sharper, anger, maybe even betrayal. Here's the truth, Commander. I stayed quiet for 3 years because I believed working within the system might stop another Blackwater 5. But watching you try to silence me in front of future officers, from the same species that burned my world, she shook her head slowly. I'm starting to think the system doesn't want to be fixed. The silence that followed felt different. Charged. Like the air before a storm breaks. Cadet Yorner rose again, more carefully this time. Commander Thicmore, I formally request access to the classified files regarding the Blackwater 5 incident. Request denied. Another cadet stood. Then another. Within seconds, half the class was on their feet, repeating the same request. Requests denied, Thicmore said, but his voice trembled. Return to your seats immediately. Where is the harm in reviewing the files? X3 asked, their optical sensors locked onto Betty. If the official reports are accurate? Because, Betty said softly, the official reports are comfortable lies. They keep the alliance stable. The truth is messy. The truth makes everyone look bad. She began fastening her armor back into place, each movement controlled. The truth is your peaceful galactic alliance stands on buried bodies and sealed archives. The truth is hundreds of humans died so Zolani politicians could declare a diplomatic victory. The truth is every one of you has been misled about what your governments do in your names. She secured her chest plate and scanned the room one last time. And here's the hardest truth. Blackwater 5 wasn't the only time. It's just the only time someone survived who refused to stay silent. She walked toward the exit, then paused at the door. You wanted to teach us about trust today, Commander. Congratulations. You've shown us that our own governments can't be trusted to tell the truth about the wars they fight for us. The door slid shut behind her, leaving 62 alien cadets and one shaken commander in a classroom that suddenly felt too small. What happened next reshaped galactic history. Not when Betty walked out. When she came back. 47 minutes later, the door opened again. Betty Vasquez strode into Combat Theory 301 carrying a datapad. Her expression made Commander Thiekmore step back without realizing it. The cadets were exactly as she had left them, half-dressed, unsettled, arguing in 6 different languages. The room buzzed like a diplomatic crisis waiting to explode. Sit down, Betty said quietly. Her voice cut through the noise. 62 aliens fell silent. Even Thiekmore froze, his eyes fixed on the datapad in her hands. Cadet Vasquez, he began, you are not authorized. Enough. Her tone was calm but firm. It stopped him mid-sentence. You've had 3 years to tell them the truth. Now it's my turn. She walked to the front, passed him without hesitation, and activated the main display. The Academy seal vanished, replaced by a simple text document. These are the names, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the amphitheater. Every human who died during your minor territorial dispute. The list began to scroll. Name after name. Age after age. Dr. Deborah Hale, Colony Administrator, 34. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, Transport Crew, 29. Rosa Alvarez, Evacuation Pilot, 22. 836 confirmed dead, Betty continued. 43 children. 112 elderly colonists who never reached evacuation points. 207 civilians killed during orbital bombardment. The rest died during ground operations. Yorner's compound eyes reflected the glowing screen, shimmering like liquid light. Where did you get this? She asked. Human colonial records, Betty replied. We keep our own history, since no one else will. Her finger hovered over the datapad. Would you like the details of how each of them died? I have those too. That information is classified, Thiekmore said weakly. No, Commander. This is human public record. Just because your government buried it doesn't mean we forgot. She tapped the screen. A map of Blackwater 5 appeared. Red dots marked orbital strike impacts. Blue dots showed body recovery sites. The elementary school, Betty said, pointing to a cluster of red marks. Direct fusion strike at 8:47 local time. 16 children. 3 teachers. Instant vaporization. She shifted to another cluster. The community center. Plasma strike at 11:34. 47 civilians sheltering inside. Her voice remained steady, but X3's sensors detected subtle tremors in her hands. The medical clinic. The food processing hubs. Residential blocks. Each site illuminated as she spoke. Civilian infrastructure. Not military targets. Not strategic assets. The rules of engagement prohibit targeting civilians, a Corvani cadet whispered. They do, Betty said, turning to face them. Which raises a question. Her gaze swept across the room. Either your military knowingly committed war crimes, or the commanders issuing those orders didn't consider human colonist civilians worth protecting. The silence that followed was suffocating. Commander Thiekmore finally managed to speak. Cadet Vasquez, these allegations are serious. If you possess evidence. Evidence. Betty gave a short, hollow laugh. Commander, I am the evidence. She touched the scar on her shoulder. These scars are evidence. The 836 names on that screen are evidence, Betty said evenly. The real question is whether anyone in your chain of command cares about evidence. She turned back to the display and opened another document. Since we're discussing evidence, let's look at the peace treaty that officially ended your territorial dispute. An official agreement filled the screen, stamped with multiple species seals. Betty highlighted a section near the end. Article 23, subsection C, she read aloud. All parties agree that discussion of casualty figures or tactical details from the Blackwater 5 incident shall remain classified for a period of no less than 50 years in the interest of maintaining diplomatic stability. And Cadet Yorner whispered. 50 years, Betty said. Long enough for nearly everyone who was there to die of old age. Convenient for protecting diplomatic stability. She scrolled down and highlighted another clause. Article 23, subsection F. Human survivors agree to accept relocation assistance and financial compensation in exchange for signing binding non-disclosure agreements covering all aspects of the incident. They purchased your silence, X3 observed. They tried to. Betty's smile was thin. But contracts only hold if both sides honor their promises. Another document appeared, financial records. The Zolani government pledged 2.3 million credits in reparations to the surviving colonists, she said. Would you like to guess how much was actually paid? How much? Yorner asked quietly. 0. Not 1 credit. Betty's tone sharpened. We did receive a polite letter explaining that budget constraints delayed payment and that funds would be processed when administratively feasible. When was that? Another cadet asked. 3 years ago, she replied. Still waiting for it to become feasible. Commander Thiekmore stepped forward, claws fully extended. Cadet Vasquez, I am ordering you to cease this unauthorized disclosure. You are violating multiple sections of military law. And what? Betty turned on him, eyes burning. What exactly will you do, Commander? Court-martial me for reading public records? Imprison me for stating facts? Make me disappear like the witnesses who refused to sign your agreement? The Zolani officer stiffened. I don't know what you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting, she said calmly. I'm stating. Another file filled the screen. Blackwater 5 had a population of 1,847 humans before the attack. Afterward, official records show 1,011 survivors relocated. She paused. That leaves 836 dead. And 0 missing persons. She let that settle. Very neat, isn't it? No unanswered questions. No survivors unaccounted for who might have declined to sign your paperwork. The room was silent except for the hum of environmental systems. Faces around her reflected horror, anger, and something like respect. You are alleging that survivor testimony was suppressed through intimidation, X3 said, their optics narrowing. I'm alleging, Betty replied, her voice colder than steel, that I'm alive to tell this story because I was 18, traumatized, and naive enough to believe justice would eventually come through official channels. She met their gaze one by one. The older survivors, the ones who demanded accountability, who asked about war crimes tribunals, strange how many of them died in transport accidents while relocating. Thiekmore's scales had faded to gray. That is a very serious accusation, he said. It's a very serious crime. Betty didn't look away. But when you're hiding the systematic killing of civilians, eliminating inconvenient witnesses becomes efficient. She turned back to the class, her voice steady and almost instructional. Let's discuss operational security. How do you conceal a war crime involving multiple fleets and thousands of personnel for 3 years? A communications log appeared on the screen. Step 1. Classify everything. Tactical reports, casualty numbers, even the colony's coordinates. Make inquiry itself feel like treason. She changed slides. Step 2. Control the narrative. Tell the media it was a minor territorial adjustment. Call it a diplomatic success. Ensure the history books describe a peaceful resolution. Another slide. Step 3. Neutralize the witnesses. Some are bought off with promises that never materialize. Others are relocated to distant worlds where they can't compare stories. The ones who persist, well, deep space is unpredictable. She surveyed the stunned faces around her. Step 4: Time. Wait long enough, and people forget. New conflicts rise. The galaxy moves on. Blackwater 5 became a footnote in diplomatic history. And 836 dead humans became a rounding error in casualty statistics. Betty closed the files and stood in silence, giving her words time to settle over the room. "There's just one flaw in that plan," she said at last. "It assumes every witness can be silenced." She touched the faint outline of scars beneath her shirt. "I am proof that your governments lied about Blackwater 5. These scars prove your peaceful alliance is built on hidden atrocities. And every name on that list belonged to someone who died because your leaders decided expansion mattered more than civilian lives." Commander Thiekmore opened his mouth, but Betty lifted a hand. "I'm not finished." Her voice dropped lower. "Here's what should truly keep you awake at night. Blackwater 5 wasn't an exception. It was just the most recent, and the only one that left behind a survivor who refused to stay quiet." She brought up one final document. The screen filled with colony names and dates. New Geneva Colony. 18 months ago. Diplomatic resolution following minor border dispute. Official casualties, minimal. Actual casualties, 412 humans. She tapped the screen again. Settlement Gamma 9. 2 years ago. Peaceful negotiation resolved territorial confusion. Official casualties, none. Actual casualties, 297 humans. Another entry. Port Harrison. 11 months ago. Administrative adjustment after mining rights miscommunication. Official record, relocations only. Actual casualties, 603 humans. The list continued scrolling. Colony after colony. Settlement after settlement. Each with a polished official summary, and a far darker reality beneath it. 7 incidents in 3 years, Betty said quietly. 3,048 dead humans. Classified. Buried. Framed as diplomatic victories. She turned and faced Thiekmore. "How many more victories does your government plan to celebrate, Commander?" That was when the alarms began. They weren't for Betty. Emergency alerts flooded every screen in the Academy. News feeds across the galaxy were broadcasting fragments of her presentation. Someone had recorded it. Someone had transmitted it. Academy lockdown initiated, an automated voice announced. All personnel remain in current positions. Commander Thiekmore was speaking rapidly into his communicator while cadets stared at the displays in disbelief. Protests were erupting on 23 worlds. Humans were sharing their own buried stories. Survivors from multiple colonies were publicly breaking their non-disclosure agreements at the same time. "You planned this," Thiekmore accused. "I didn't have to," Betty replied calmly, watching the feeds. Truth spreads quickly once the first crack appears. On screen, a hegemony news anchor read casualty updates in real time as more reports poured in. The numbers climbed steadily. 3,000. 5,000. 8,000 dead humans across dozens of so-called diplomatic successes. Cadet Yorner rose slowly. "My government voted to approve the Blackwater 5 resolution. My people celebrated it as a triumph of peaceful negotiation." "Mine too," X3 said quietly. One by one, cadets began removing their rank insignia and placing them on their desks. Not in protest. Not in anger. In shame. The screens showed emergency sessions convening in galactic capitals. Politicians demanded explanations. Military officers were detained. The carefully maintained story of peaceful coexistence was collapsing in real time. Betty gathered her gear and headed for the door again. "Where are you going?" Thiekmore called after her. She paused at the threshold and looked back at the room, at 62 future officers who would never again trust the comforting version of history they had been taught. "Home," she said. "Earth is recalling all human citizens from Alliance space. We're no longer interested in participating in your peaceful galaxy." The door slid shut behind her. Inside, 62 cadets stood frozen, watching the unraveling of the galactic alliance they had sworn to defend. Moments later, a final transmission from Earth was broadcast to every world in known space. For words that changed everything. Diplomatic immunity revoked.